Hello, Central Oregon, and welcome to Talk Real Estate. I'm Fred Johnson. I'm your host today, and I appreciate you being here. Many of you may have awakened this morning and noted that there was a little bit of frost for the first season. Boy, what a treat. I guess that lets us know that spring, it's sort of God's way of letting us know that it's time to get our chores done before winter sets in. It does a good job for you, those of you that are up there camping and listening to me on the radio. It knocks down the mosquitoes, but it also sort of irritates the yellow jackets a little bit. So, and for the rest of you that are enjoying the first weekend of college football, I appreciate you tuning in, and hopefully we'll have a little bit of fun today. Back to school for everybody else. Labor Day weekend is sort of the transition period. For many of you that are not parents, you think that this is a real freeing time to parents, but in all actuality, it sort of sets our schedule with activities and making it to the bus on time and all of those sort of things. So it really adds much more structure to parents' lives as school starts. So, we're going to discuss a few things today. I had an interview here on Thursday, and we were able to just touch on a couple of issues. And there was a recent article that came out about the percentage of home ownership falling. I just wanted to address that a little bit. Obviously, affordable housing is really quite a big issue right now. And, maybe we'll talk about that a little bit. Systems development charges, investment guidelines. And then last week, we were going to talk about 1031 exchanges, which, by the way, I received a number of emails this week with reference to that show, and apparently a number of you were quite appreciative of sort of dispelling some of the myths on the get-rich-quick schemes as they come through town. And certainly it's not to say that the get-rich-quick schemes don't have some merit and don't have some valuable information that they share, but they seem to, in the enthusiasm, sort of omit some of the minor details that could really have some impact on the layperson trying to get into the exciting world of real estate. As you know, on our mission here at Talk Real Estate is to, bring real estate information that you can use, and with an invitation for you to participate in the discussion anytime. You can always call in at our number here at the station is 541-388-1110. And the bottom line is, surround yourself with seasoned professionals. When you're making those decisions on big ticket items, whether they're the homes or, as in the previous hour show here with Northwest Quadrant, your financial planning for your retirement and that sort of thing, those issues that are big ticket issues, those are worth really surrounding yourself with the best team that you can, so that you can make good decisions that will work well for you and are not necessarily high risk decisions. I guess what I'd like to talk about first here is let's go ahead and get right into this issue about the home ownership dipping a little bit, because that's one that came out in the news, and the headline obviously reads very, very hard, and it sort of fans the fire. And I think that the one thing that is becoming increasingly clear, I want to thank those of you that give me the opportunity to do this show, but what it really forces me to do is to do some of the homework and get out and read these articles and sort of compare the data a little bit. And sometimes it's a little bit like having CNN on one station and Fox on the other station. You read the same information, but the story is spun two entirely different ways, and then you need to sort of read between the lines and figure out actually what's really happening. And so the headline read, U.S. home ownership rate hits 48-year low, which it's a quarterly number. But the thing that it didn't really go into any detail on, which is, the real primary effect of that, is that the vast majority of that impact, or that percentage relationship, happened as a result of new rental households. And it's not home ownership, but it's still the number of overall households of ownership decreased by 400,000 nationally, but the number of renter households increased by 2 million. So in the spread of the number of people moving into rental properties and the number of people purchasing homes, there's a bit of a spread there in that number. And it's kind of hard to really kind of get a handle on exactly why that is happening. Of course, the one thing that's quite interesting is the fact that incomes are not keeping pace with the home prices as they're going up. And the other that's starting to have some impact is because we had the the recession and some things were off. Some young first-time homeowners and that are maybe just a little resistant to get into ownership and feel a little more comfortable being in a rental property. But then when they get into the rental property, the amount of the increasing rents and the fact that the income isn't keeping up, it makes it a little bit harder for them to save their down payment and to be able to enter the market. But the numbers kind of read like this. This year, second quarter, 63.5%, which was down from 64.7% of the second quarter last year. Over the last 50 years, we've had an average of about 65.3% home ownership in the market. And, it peaked in 2004, but actually it started moving downward before the recession started. There was and you got to remember during that time, that's a time where if you showed up at the mortgage office and you were standing up, and you could tell them you were making as much money as you wanted to tell them. They wouldn't verify your income. They weren't required to make a down payment. So obviously there were a number of people just lining up to take these loans. Now, I don't know who's at fault for that, whether it's the homeowner that took the no qualifies zero down, or whether it was the mortgage brokers that were taking opportunity at that time to, force people into these loans. However it works out, there were a number of people that found themselves in home ownership that probably would not have been in home ownership otherwise. But, basically what it says all in all is that, as I've been saying the last couple of weeks, we're really looking at a relatively stable market moving forward. Our vacancy factor is down quite low on homes. It's 1.8% nationally. It's about 6% in rental properties throughout the country. What that means when vacancy factors get down that low, that means that gives the incentive for the builders to continue building because there's obviously a demand for more housing. So we're going to see an increased number. But, the sad component of it, and I think the thing that sort of resonates here in our market, is that we're seeing that first-time home buyers are still playing a historically small part in that overall deal. So as the market moves forward, they figure that we're going to see some stabilization in it here in 2016, 2017, and by 2020, anticipate that it'll settle in right around 62, 64%, which is a little bit lower than the historic average. But then again, we have an awful lot of people that are in a position where home ownership isn't really quite as attractive to them as yet as it has been in previous generations. And the other thing that's actually factoring in there a little bit, which is kind of an interesting, as you're trying to do these mathematical equations and push them forward, you need to have all of the numbers on the table to really make a fair assessment. But where previously we used to have home ownership was 4 to 6 years was the actual average term of home ownership. People would buy and or sell a property every 4 to 6 years. And now we're seeing that number start to kick out a little bit closer to 8 to 10, which doesn't sound like much for one or two houses, but when you're talking about hundreds of millions of homes throughout the country, that has a really dramatic impact, and it really puts much more pressure on the need for additional inventory to come into the market. So anyway, that was a big headline this week, but I don't think that it's necessarily indicative of we're all going to be pushed out on the streets and be living in small rentals in the foreseeable future. And Bend, as you might well suspect, plays right into that market. And after we come back from break, we'll get into some of these other issues. You can always call here at the station, 541-388-1110, and we'll look forward to talking to you right after the break. Hello, and welcome back. I'm Fred Johnson. This is Talk Real Estate. Thank you so much for tuning in today. So before the break there, we were talking about the apparent decline in the percentage relationship of home ownership throughout the country and also here in Bend. And, basically what we're seeing with that bottom line is that there's been such an explosion of need for households. The vast majority of those have ended up in rental properties and not ended up in first-time home ownership. So it's having a little bit of downward pressure on that. But this brings up another topic, which we're receiving an awful lot of discussion in Bend currently, which is affordable housing. And affordable housing is another one of those topics that's it's a little bit of a mixed bag because the term says something different to everybody. Obviously, it's not fair, it's not right when you have a household that is working very, very hard and they have service jobs and they're trying to and would like to enjoy the benefits of home ownership. And in some cases, the rental market is so tight, they're working hard and trying to do everything that they can, and they find that they can't even find a suitable rental for them and their family. And that, of course, obviously is the bottom line of affordable housing. But then sort of as we move up and we start to look for how can we make that happen, what entities, whether they're private entities, they're nonprofits, they're government entities, what does affordable housing look like? Is it rental properties? Is it entry-level housing? And so I think that it's one of those, in my estimation, a little bit, it's one of those buzzwords that receives an awful lot of discussion, but really speaks differently to different audiences and how different audiences receive that information. There's certainly a need for affordable housing, whether it be rental property or owner-occupied property. How we get there seems to be something that's going to require, some input, on both levels. One in the core area density, as we've mentioned before, the systems development charge, or not systems development charge, excuse me. We'll get to that in a minute. But the urban growth boundary, basically eliminates inexpensive land. There's virtually no inexpensive land to build on. So there's no clean palette to build some larger projects of affordable housing. And then secondly, whether those are going to be vertical projects, how many stories are they going to be? Are they going to be one level? One of the things that would be required to do a little bit of a land use change would be what you would call cluster developments. And cluster developments are developments where they sort of have a number of units per acre slated, so that if they'd like to build 6.1 to 9.5 dwelling units per acre, that's sort of a stated density for that zone. And then what a cluster development would allow is that you would use that same density, but you would move the cluster homes into a more dense area in one portion of the property, thereby opening up some open space for either some parkland or some community land or whatever. It's an experiment, and actually not an experiment. It's been built in numerous areas throughout the country, been very, very well received. If you could, for sort of a mental vision, if you could imagine that you would have a very large city block, and around the outside of the block there were small homes that faced the street with their sidewalks facing the street, but then they all opened to an inner courtyard and park that was accessed on the corners, but it created a bunch of open space so that even though you had some high density living, you had some open space in the center. And that's one a couple of weeks ago when we had the Core Community Land Trust come in. That was sort of what they're proposing is a bit of a community, a little bit more comprehensive community. And personally, one of the things that I liked about that in affordable housing is that, it was all mandated on median income to buy in, to sell. It basically allowed that inventory would remain in the affordable sector of the market. And I'm certainly not trying to call out anyone. Well, I won't even call them out by name. But some of the other programs that we have now, we find a family in need and build them a house and get them in, and they receive the benefit of that, of the affordable housing. But then as soon as it's realized that there's the possibility of some profit to be made, they sell the property, and then the property then just comes into the regular inventory and is taken out of that affordable sector of the market. So, as we're looking at what affordable housing is going to look like. I'm going to try to bring in some guests here in the next couple of weeks. I ran into someone from Neighbor Impact, and they'd like to come in and talk about their down payment assistance program. There's some educational programs, and there's some things that may be really beneficial to some of our listeners out there. But one of the things that I got right off of it was that it really takes a bit of a commitment to the buyer. A few years ago, pretty much if you didn't have much of a down payment, or you needed to do some credit repair, you had something like that you needed to do, you could kind of get that done in a 4 to 6 month timeline, and now they're seeing that those timelines are actually running out a little bit longer. I don't know if it's because the down payment requirement is a little bit larger or what it is, but hopefully we'll be able to get them in and be able to talk through that, give you some contact information so that you would be able to get through to Neighbor Impact. One of the things that we had here this last week, which was pretty interesting, is there's really been this ongoing discussion. And as you know, and I'll just go ahead and state it out front, I think that the Parks and Rec Department certainly needs to be a participant. They seem to be sort of the elephant of the room when it comes to funding, and to be able to participate at some degree or another in the affordable housing need certainly seems in order, seems correct. But the city of Bend, had put together that they had some loans for some projects that were coming forward in the amount of $900,000. And they basically didn't give Habitat for Humanity too much. Habitat for Humanity asked for 165, and they ended up with about 85 of that. A local developer wanted to build a for-profit section with the assurance that he would build a non-profit section, not-for-profit section after that. But it was a total of 5 market rate units and 7 affordable units. And he received a fair portion of that, which is $358,000. And then there was another company that came into the area, that Pacific Crest, that received an award of $458,000 for a proposed 48-unit apartment complex in a location yet to be determined. And so, I mean, they received a loan for not even having the plans, the drawing, or the land that it's on, which seems to be a little interesting to see. But those systems development charges that go into the city, and the way that they're dispersed and how that goes really has a dramatic impact on what we're doing and how we're doing that going forward. Maybe when we come back from the break, I'd like to sort of break out systems development charges just a little bit, because we keep hearing this term SDCs. And there's sort of that feeling that it's a fee, it's not a tax, and that it's paid by somebody else. So as we all know, a tax that's paid by somebody else is a good tax. A tax that we have to pay isn't a particularly good tax. And I think that is one of the things in our city, and particularly at the affordable housing sector of the market, that is impacting the values of our properties as they're moving forward. And I just think that it'd be nice to sort of, shed a little light on that so that we can all discuss that in an open manner. So when we come back after the break, we'll talk a little bit about SDCs, and then I've been threatening for a couple of weeks here to talk about 1031 exchanges. You can always send me an email at fred@dukewarner.com. You can always visit my website, which is just simply askfredjohnson.com. If you have any recommendations for future shows, anybody you would like to have interviewed, any discussions you would like to have talked about, that'd be a great place to go. When we come back, we'll talk a little bit about SDCs, and if you're interested in participating in the program, don't hesitate to give a call in. Look forward to it. One of these days I'm going to quit howling at that Werewolf of London. I might even have to have my station manager change that bumper music there so that I'm not so inclined to do that. Welcome back. Your Talk Real Estate. I'm Fred Johnson. I'm your host. I'm happy to have you with me today. Today we've been discussing a little bit the affordable housing issue, and really trying to get some clarity to some of the things that we're seeing out there in the news that seem to be a little emotional, and it's really hard to understand what's going on. And I'm certainly not trying to say that our city fathers are engaged in sleight of hand in any way, but I think that it's like watching a magician. And, you don't want to watch the hand that your eye is drawn to. You want to watch the other hand to see really what's going on. And the systems development charge thing is really an interesting process and project. And what I'm going to try to do is just maybe add a little bit of clarity to it, or at least a little bit of disclosure to it, and to allow you to realize that sometimes it's hard, particularly when it comes to funding issues and that, to really keep track on what's going on, particularly if things are in a lot of different piles and there isn't really sort of full disclosure of the total price and the total value. When you read some of the articles that are out today, and they say that the systems development charges for building a new single-family home in Bend is about $25,000. And everybody goes, well, that's cool. We can charge those builders and those developers that are making so much money for the impact that they're having on our town. But within that $25,000, there's a number of other fees that are sort of broken out individually for the sum total that adds up. So, let's just be really clear about it. If in addition to the cost of the land and the labor and the materials and the design fees and everything that it takes to build the home, there's an additional $25,000 added to it. What that means is that by the time the purchaser sees that, there's going to be that $25,000 plus a little bit of interest added to it. And so it basically means that the base price for new homes move up. And so, kind of what that means is, I'm going to isolate one, because we had some discussion here this last week, or actually the last few weeks, on whether or not the city and Parks and Rec were going to participate. Well, somehow or another, miraculously, in the article, it moved from $25,000 to about $17,000 in their participation of how that would look. I don't really know where that $8,000 went, but maybe that's in other fees going to the roadway and to the design review and all of that. So what it comes down to is the Park and Rec component is a little bit more than $7,000, $7 going to $8,000. So let's just say, for discussion's sake, that portion, just the Park and Rec portion alone, adds about $10,000 to the price of a new home. Well, at one end of the market, that's really not an awful lot. But at the other end of the market, that's quite a substantial end. And so when we're talking about affordable housing, and let's just say that we're talking about a $200,000 home, well, at the $500,000 quotient, adding $10,000 is really only adding about 5% to the overall cost, which isn't that big. It's still an add, but it's not that big. But at the lower end, at $200,000, that adds 12.5%. Now, mind you, that's just the Park and Rec portion. That's not the City of Bend. That's not the road. That's not the sewer. That's not the water. Which, by the way, the sewer. Here's another interesting one that has just come out. They just announced that the sewer fees, and granted, we all need sewer, are going to increase the systems development charges by 45%. And so as not to have that impact all happen at once, half is going to happen on September 1st, and the other half is going to happen in March of 2016. But, what that really means is that it's going to go from where it is currently. I enjoy how specific the numbers, where it's currently at $2,986, $2,986. So let's just say that it's $3,000. It's going to move to $4,341. Let's just say it's going to move to $4,500. So there's going to be a swing of $1,500. Well, that's cool. Those new developers should spend another $1,500 toward their impact on our sewer. But basically what they're saying is that home prices are going to go up by $2,000. So it's something that affects each and every one of us, but the unfortunate thing is, because it's exactly equal throughout all of the price points throughout the market, the ones that it affects the most are those that are at the lower end, at the entry level, at that first-time home buyer sector of the market. And it really seems that it's something that deserves a little bit of tension, a little bit of discussion, and I realize that I'm calling out Park and Rec, but I think that all of us kind of need to realize that, the biggest projects that we have going on in town are being driven by the Parks and Rec. They're down rerouting the river, which, hey, that's going to be cool. It's going to be cool to have a park down there. It's going to be cool to have an ice rink right around the corner. But, we've got people that are sleeping in their cars that are working in our town, and it just seems that, for them to, and that discussion, let's just kind of go into that discussion just a little bit. That discussion was whether in an accredited program that the City of Bend Building Department would be willing to waive the system development fees for compliant projects. Now, they've, had to jump through some hoops to become a compliant project. It wasn't just handed out to anybody. Then the City of Bend would be willing to waive about $900,000 worth of potential fees. Okay. And they asked, which Parks and Rec said that they didn't want to participate, they asked for Parks and Rec to waive $600,000 worth of fees for a total of $1.5 million worth of fees to be done over 2 years, which if you take their numbers, the 17,000, and you divide that out, that affects the potential of 82 dwelling units, which means that it would affect 41 dwelling units per year, which really the need for affordable housing is way bigger than 41 dwelling units per year. So there would be, we could go on into perpetuity at that rate and never catch up with the need for affordable housing and what we have here in Bend. So I think that it was grossly understated. But the numbers as they appear in the newspapers, like, wow, City of Bend's going to contribute, almost $1 million toward it. It sounds like a lot of money, but when the boots hit the ground, it's really not that much money. And let's just continue to use the $17,000 because we know that it's an understated figure. If they're building 1,000 apartment units in here, that's $17 million. That's a lot of money. And so, you would think with these large operating budgets and with that much money going across the table that, a paltry $600,000, and it wasn't a payment. It was no money going out. It was just simply waiving that amount of fee coming in toward the systems development charges of affordable housing projects. And I just think that, here in the City of Bend, as we're really looking at, the need of our community, who's out there, what are we trying to do to accommodate them. Straight across the board, it appears that the market is doing quite well. I'll have some more statistics here in the next week or two, but what I suspect that they're going to show is that we're still having a brisk market, that there's a number of new inventory coming into the market. I don't think that the sales are falling off, and they're not, going through the roof either. But, I chatted with a couple of people this last week. And chatted with a young lady from the DMV, and the DMV is issuing between 100 to 200 new driver's licenses a day. Well, that's a considerable number. At the library, they're issuing nearly 30 library cards a day. I know in my business, in the real estate business, there's 30 to 40 new real estate agents a month showing up that want to be in the exciting world of real estate. So, as we look at it and we look at the community in totality, it's really quite obvious that there are a number of people moving into the area. There are a number of people that are coming from other areas. We have a low vacancy factor in our rental properties. We have a need for some housing, and the ones that are being affected and pushed on the most out of the whole deal are those that are at the entry level into the market. I don't have an answer for that, but I think that, as citizens where we're comfortable and we're sitting at home and we hear that, that's good. Yeah, just keep increasing those fees, keep building those parks, keep adding those new things to the community. Somebody pays for it, and the net result is it doesn't go to benefit the people that are in need in our community. And so while it makes really good headlines in the newspaper, it doesn't necessarily answer some of the questions that we have in our community and what it's going to look like going forward. I had a young lady stop in my office today that wants to move back to Bend after being away some time. A shout out to you, Cammie, in case you decided to tune in today. And she said, well, what's happening? What's it look like in the future? Will we see those prices go away? And the one thing that we reasonably concluded was that, housing prices at $150,000, we're probably past that. We're probably not going to see too much of that. And if we do, that means that there's going to be probably a catastrophic event somewhere else, which means that even if it did happen, our income to debt ratios and some of those things may affect us, that we may not be in a position to take advantage of that. So if there's a huge collapse in housing values, which, honestly, we have so many homes with people putting large downs. We have so many homes that people are purchasing all cash that the likelihood of that happening in the foreseeable future just really isn't all that great. So when we come back, we're going to talk about a couple of questions that were raised this last week. Some people were asking me some questions about investment properties and how to structure that, and what kind of maybe ratios we might want to look at. So we'll talk about that, and hopefully you'll tune in after the break. Hello, Central Oregon. Welcome back. I'm your host, Fred Johnson. Here we are on Talk Real Estate. So we've been talking about a bunch of grim things here so far today, but I think that it's really important that we get involved and get in there. And I just wanted to give a shout out to some of our acreage property owners out there. One of the things that I said at the top of the hour is that these first couple of cold mornings is sort of an indicator for us to get out and get our chores done. So, if some of you are like me out there and you wait until October 15th when they cut off our irrigation, and then you start to do your chores. Oftentimes you find yourself standing in the rain and in the cold, maybe doing some chores that you should have done during that winter, what do we call it, Indian summer that we have in September, where the temperatures are around 70 degrees, and it's a lot easier to wrestle with your irrigation lines and start putting some things away. So, get out there and have some fun and enjoy it, because this next week we'll probably have nice weather for a week, and a lot of people want to run to the mountains and get in their last days of summer camping. So during this last quarter, one of the things that I wanted to talk about was I talked last week about a group that came through town that was talking about flip your home, how you can get involved in the real estate market, how you can invest, and what that looks like. And I had a couple of questions that were emailed to me this week. Again, my email is fred@dukewarner.com. And they were asking about percentage relationships on income properties. And what does that look like? And years ago, this is obsolete. And what I would tell you is if you drive past a property that's in reasonable shape and it meets just this simple qualifying criteria, get to your broker and write an offer on it right away, because we're seeing that those numbers in the spread has increased a little bit. But the rule used to be that if the monthly rental rents were about 1% of the sales price, then that makes sense. So, in other words, and you'll realize the fallacy in this as soon as I share the numbers, if it's renting for $1,500 a month, let's say you've got a duplex and both sides are renting for $750, and they're only asking $150,000 for the property. That $150,000 is 1% of that sales price. And again, if you see that, if you get out there in the market today and see something that the gross monthly rents are 1% of the sales price, that means that there's enough money in there that you'd be able to probably do okay as a rental property. We're now starting to see that a little closer to 0.5%, 0.75%, which is a little harder math to do in your head. But the easy math, obviously, is you just take the sales price and put your thumb over two of the zeros and look at it. And if the monthly rent comes in near that figure, that's a pretty good figure. One of the things that we have coming up here in the next couple of weeks, and again, your input is always welcome, but we're going to try to get somebody in from Neighbor Impact. I've also got an appraiser that's kind of standing in the wings that would like to come in and share with you a couple of things. And one obviously is, the plight of the appraiser, if you will. It's hard to drive through life staring in the rearview mirror, but appraisers sort of look back, and I think what he would like to do is maybe share with you, those of you that are interested, the appraisal process. So for those of you that are looking at home ownership, you'll understand how that process works. And for many of you that are looking at refinancing, you may wonder why, your house that you think is worth $1 million, there's an old joke that has a series of pictures, and it's, how you see your house and how your neighbor sees your house and how your appraiser sees your house. And generally the way your appraiser sees your house isn't quite as luxurious as the way that you see your home. But we're looking forward to having him come in. But I think one of the things that I would like to talk with him about a little bit there in that investment mode is that allocation of the sale. What value is in the different aspects of the property. So those of you that are investors or hoping to be investors, you might want to tune into that show, because we'll be able to kind of line that out. Because a little bit of, obviously, making your investment, a good place to start is in the sales price, but then also, how you structure that sales price moving forward will certainly have some impact on you as to how that looks moving forward. So one of the other issues that came up last week, and what was his name again? Thane Merrill. Thane Merrill was an equity builders, which was they were on all the television, all the radio stations, and basically what they were trying to do is, one, sell a 3-day seminar, and then secondly, sell some counseling or coaching that would go on for people that would be interested in, flipping real estate, finding different vehicles to engage in real estate. And last week we talked about tax liens, being able to buy tax liens, which is something that you can't do here. Some of the difficulty was self-directed IRAs. But one of the other topics that we didn't get to finish up on was 1031 exchanges. And that's one of those things that you hear a little bit about. Some years ago you heard here in Bend, if you've lived here for a while, you heard about Summit Accommodators that were involved in the 1031 exchange deal and sort of redirected some of those funds while they were in transit. And so what I'm hopeful to do today is just to explain the 1031 exchange, kind of how it works. And once again, this is something that you would want to, if you get involved in this, you would want to have a seasoned professional do it. But it's one of the things that's truly impacting, particularly in some of these investment properties, is impacting our market here, because it's a way, basically what a 1031 exchange is, or a tax-deferred exchange. It's just simply the way that you can move equity that you've acquired or accrued in one property into another property without incurring a taxable event. And very, very simply, that's what it is. And what the 1031 stands for is that's the code in the Internal Revenue Code. So it's the IRC number 1031. The 1033 is if you had it through condemnation. There's a little different guidelines, but it's a similar process. And so what it allows for is, let's say that I have a customer that lives in another market area. He's in Seattle, he's in Portland, he's in San Francisco. It doesn't really make any difference where they're located. And they want to sell a property that they've had as an investment. Well, that gain, and particularly it wouldn't be just against, like on your primary residence, is not just against the purchase price of the property and the improvements that you put into it, because most investors take back what they call cost recovery or depreciation. They devalue the amount of that property during the time that they hold it. So what that means is that their potential gain, taxable gain, is much larger. And what a 1031 exchange basically says is that when you sell a property, you can then place it with an accommodator. The accommodator will hold those funds so that you don't derive any benefit from them. You don't get any interest. You don't get to touch the money. You don't get to do anything. You have a 45-day period to go out and designate which other properties you would like to purchase. And then that accommodator will then take your funds and purchase those properties, and thereby qualifying for the tax-deferred exchange. Now, the word deferred with tax doesn't mean that it's a giveaway. It's not that they're waiving the taxes. It's just simply that they're deferring those taxes for a later date. And so what it allows someone to do is to move their equity in one property into another property without discounting it by paying taxes. So in other words, if you were in the 40% tax bracket, which I realize is overstated, if you just paid the taxes on $100,000, you'd pay Uncle Sam 40 and you'd get to keep 60. Or with a 1031, you'd be able to reinvest that $100,000 into another subsequent property. And the way that it's affecting our community here a little bit is we're having these people that are anticipating moving to Bend, retiring in Bend. They're going to be here sometime in the future. So what they will do is they will sell their property in another market and then reinvest those funds into our market. And the reason that it sort of plays in is what I was mentioning here a minute ago on that income to value ratio, because they're looking at the potential of writing an awful big check in taxes on their potential gain. They don't really care that much if they pay a little bit more for the property than it justifies from an income perspective, because the consequence of going the other way is that it's going to cost them a lot of money. So what that would allow them to do is, let's just say a gentleman sells a large industrial building somewhere else. He's able to come up here and buy 4 apartment buildings, get them up and going, and in anticipation of moving here at a later date. So they give me a little bit of music there. That's when they're trying to push me out of the station. I want to thank you again for tuning in today at Talk Real Estate. I'm your host, Fred Johnson. Always happy to hear from you. Hit my website, askfredjohnson.com. There's a little section there where you can tell me I'm good, I'm bad, whatever, or something you'd like to talk about. You can always email me at fred@Duke Warner. And to Linda, if you're out there listening, one of our active listeners, she always encourages me to make mistakes, and she may have noted that I made a few mistakes today on the board. So until next week, get out there and have some fun.
KBND FM News 100.